Seth Rollins nearly breaks his neck in the ring, and WWE creates a completely cosmetic championship and tournament in order to sell brand new superstars from NXT and give marketing opportunities. Plus, 2026 Backlash review. Let's get into it. We start 2026 Backlash from Tampa Bay, Florida. Now, first match of the night was Rollins versus Breakker, a high-intensity match. I must say the match was a pretty good match, although there were some botched segments. There was a segment in which Seth Rollins ended up on his head. It was, as I said, there were a couple of botches. There was 2 Frankensteiner attempts. One of them was a beautiful Frankensteiner. However, the first attempt at the Frankensteiner did not necessarily come off well for both competitors. However, there was also another suplex. There was a suplex as well. There was another segment, maybe I'm mixing it up with the suplex. However, there was a segment in which it was a reversal, if I remember right. And Seth ended up spiked right on the top of his head. Very worrying for Seth, considering the fact that he's only just come back from injury. As the match started, I watched Seth's movement to see if he was actually in, proper shape, if he was fully fit, because we know that he's been cleared for medical, but I believe that was kayfabe for a long time. And the reason he's been doing so many promo segments, and it's just he's been selling hits. Something you can do when you are fit, but maybe not 100%. So I like what he's done. He is definitely an architect. He has done, I think, a lot of the crafting of his storylines have a lot to do with Seth, quite frankly. And I believe that's why they call him the architect. For a lot of us, we hear that name, we don't quite understand what it is. But over time, you start to see segments and you start to see his involvement and his crafting, his input in a lot of the storylines that he's involved in. And it's no surprise that a lot of the storylines that Seth is actually in are far superior than most of the people on the roster. And that happens time and time again. And that is because he is the architect. So it was unfortunate. It was a little bit worrying to see him in that moment, but the referee did the squeeze test. The referee had a few words with him on the mat. You could see that if you know the business like that. And he was fine. He was good to go. The boys worked well together, I must say. However, some of these botches are why I would have said I did say in my earlier previous videos that I don't necessarily think Bron Breakker is totally ready. I don't think he's totally there. That's not to say he's in a great performer and that he won't grow to be that. Also, I went live for the event. Something I said in that video is he is no Scotty. And I said that when he botched the first Frankenstein. He is no Scotty. Now, Scotty wasn't necessarily the greatest for promos, and indeed, Bron Breakker has gotten better at that at a faster rate, I must say. However, I don't think he's completely there yet. I feel like he was thrusted into the North American title too quickly. I feel like he was thrusted into the NXT title too quickly. The only place I felt like he was truly learning something was when he was with Baron Corbin as a tag team partner and tag team champions down in NXT. They looked great together. They worked great together. And he had someone who had been in the business for a significant amount of time to help him with that. That is going to lead us to something that I have to say later that is very important. So I'm going to run through Backlash because Backlash is simply just the appetizer for this video, if I'm being honest. So we got through that, and obviously the winner of that match ended up being Bron Breakker. It could have gone anyway. I feel like a returning superstar, Seth Rollins, really and truly, he should have won. I know he's had a fun match since then, and Bron cost him, and this feud is going to obviously go on for a longer amount of time because there's not really anything to put Bron Breakker in at the moment. It doesn't make sense putting him into the heavyweight sphere right now. So I think this is a feud that is just going to continue on. So that led us to the Trick Williams match. Now, I must say, this match, it was a PLE. Right, so I don't really have a great deal in the respects of promo and such, but I will say Trick Williams versus Sami Zayn was an absolute standout match. I think it was well put together before the match, and that was kind of exemplified in the tail of the tape, the VT that they had before the match, that they showed there was so much put and crafted into the creation of this. It simply should have maybe been for WrestleMania. It should have been for something bigger, but it shows you the creative angle. I don't know if that was Trick, if that was creative, or that was Sami, but it was great. This whole Gingerbread Man and Little Yachty, and it just altogether worked. It was a wonderful match. Seeing Trick in a capacity of really having to work for that win, despite his crash and his arrogance and so forth, seeing him have to work for this title, I really actually quite liked this match and what they did. I thought it was a fantastic, fantastic match. So I will give it my best match of the night. best match of the night. I will say, I will give it my best match of the night. Congratulations to Trick Williams and Sami Zayn, the Triple Crown champs, Backlash winners for best match of the night. Congratulations, gentlemen. That took us on to Danhausen versus, well, Danhausen and Minihausen, his secret partner, versus The Miz and Kit Wilson. I'm so glad to see Kit Wilson getting more time on TV. And that's not to say I'm a huge fan of Kit Wilson. I'm not. I've never really warmed to Kit Wilson by himself. I like Pretty Deadly, the two of them together, and that took a lot of warming to. Yes, you hear my accent. We're not the same. That's some high living kind of, that's almost like an RP English accent. That is not me. That is not us, right? They not like us. So I never really warmed to this Buckinghamshire. I never warmed to these fellows. But after a while, I think there was an NXT. If a lot of you watched NXT, there was an NXT. I forget what the event was. It was a takeover of some kind. And it was hosted, just like John Cena hosts or a PLE. They hosted a NXT a takeover. I thought it was a ridiculous idea. But I started to watch them out of the capacity of being wrestlers. And they were always pretty good wrestlers. They were just really annoying. They were heels. And no one was supposed to like them. So in that respect, got to think they did their job pretty well. But yeah, that's when I started to warm to Pretty Deadly and realize that these guys really have an exceptional amount of talent and there's a lot they could do. So I'm really glad to see Kit Wilson getting an opportunity to really show what he's got. Once again, to his partner in Pretty Deadly, I forget what his name is. I know it starts with an E, but it's Belgian or something like that, or I forget exactly what it is. But get well soon. I hope he can come back to the business. I understand it was a significant injury towards his neck, so we may never see him again in the wrestling business, but let's get well soon, at least for some measure of living a normal life. Aside from that, the match was... It was a good match. It was a good match. And I'm glad Danhausen did a little bit more than your bog standard basic wrestling, because I've seen Danhausen wrestle before. I know that he's got it. So it was just a great, and the Minihausen was a fantastic wrestler. The Minihausen was truly, he had something. He took a vertical from Kit Wilson that was just nasty, and he just took the bump and moved on. Professional. We all know that there's these wrestlers, these little people, wrestlers around the world in many promotions. The Mexican promotions uses them a lot. So we know that they're around a lot, and I think this was actually a good idea for Danhausen to not use a wrestler from TNA or NXT or just pick a random person or a legend. Indeed, he picked who he picked, and the whole segment worked. I know it's something he's done before in his career, but the whole segment worked, and it was great. It was absolutely great. Good spot for those guys. All four involved, and the Minihausens loved it. That brings us to IYO versus Asuka. This was a match I was looking forward to. As a matter of fact, I thought there was a small possibility. There was no possibility. Poquito, that possibly Kyrie might show. Now, I watched an interview with Steven Richards, and he made a very important point. Why would she? For her to come back, she would have to re-sign to the WWE or indeed a one-off. And to do a one-off, you would need to pay her a significant amount of money. You better. Everyone should demand a ridiculous amount of money. The company has already shown her what they think of her. Not enough to keep her on board. So therefore, why would she re-sign a contract just to finish this storyline? I really wanted her to finish the storyline because that's how I work in my head. I want to see someone finish a storyline. We all have that, right? Our favorite show that got cancelled and they didn't finish, they were moving towards something and they didn't get to finish it, and it still burns you up inside. God damn it, what did you do to Glow, Netflix? And I mean, it just upsets us. We want a definitive ending to that show. And Santa Clarita Diet. So it would have been nice to see Kyrie, but I understand why she didn't show. Reports, and these are authentic, I'm not joking now, she has been seen back in mainland Japan. So I guess she's not going to go to AEW. I think she's probably going to go back to Stardom. And if we're being honest, why not go back to your homeland? The language isn't a problem. She will be able to cut promos over there, and the scene is not heavily dependent on promos. So therefore, she can do what she does best. She can just wrestle. The promos aren't all that necessary. She can still tell a storyline in the ring, we know that. But the promos aren't all that necessary as much as they are in a US market. There's a lot less pageantry as far as, well, promotional and just selling stuff. They're not trying to do that. They're just trying to sell the product of wrestling. That's it. She would probably fit much better in a company like that, which also brings us to, I mean, there were a few botches in the IYO Asuka match. Nothing to write home too much about. I mean, the one that stands out in my mind was the over the moonsault where she was supposed to catch her in an armbar and she voted over too far because I guess she was just trying to not land on Asuka. was IYO over the moonsault, and he just overshot it a little bit, meaning the armbar just it didn't click. There were a few moments like that. And I did actually say to myself during watching the match that it's kind of odd, two people who know each other so well to be having so many kind of mismatch moments. But there's nerves, and it's very possible that what we saw at the end of the match was a factor, because, well, obviously we saw how the match ended. If Theo was unaware of what Asuka was going to do, then she probably would have just done a celebration and Asuka would have walked out. You know what I mean? So, and that revelation I'm talking about is the fact that it very much looks like Asuka is also going to leave the company. We understand the whole situation of the 50% pay cut, which led to Kofi and Xavier leaving. It also might have played some role in the MFT members who also left. That's Jeff Cobb, JC Mateo, and indeed Tonga Loa Macho leaving the company. So because of this, there are some speculations around Asuka. And if we look at Asuka, it looks like they don't really have a lot for Asuka to do, despite how significant she is. It leads me to something else we need to talk about. And as a matter of fact, I might put that in another video. I wanted to speak about that today, but I'm already running quite long. So I might talk about that in another video. And that thing is exactly based around my next segment. So it's the John Cena announcement. The John Cena announcement, which is there's going to be a John Cena Classic tournament in which celebrates the wrestler despite not winning the match. Wrestling is a competition. It's a prize competition. It's very much like boxing. It's very much like MMA. It's apart from the mold of gladiator sports. So to therefore then make a tournament that says the winner might still lose, or the winner of the tournament may not win because the fans get to vote, I'm going to have to go into this in another video, if I'm being honest. So I think there's so much problematic with this, and I think this is such a TKO move. I don't think this has anything to do with wrestling, because in the history of wrestling, most things get redone and innovated. There's a reason something like this has never been done before. It's because it's quite literally ridiculous. But so that brings us to Roman Reigns versus Jacob Fatu. This was a good match. It was a better match than I thought it was going to be. Well, maybe that's the incorrect thing to say. It truly was a good match. Jacob Fatu is a great performer. And more, I appreciate Roman Reigns, I must say. I was very much one of the people who thought he was just pushed too heavily over a period of time. And I am generally very stubborn. Once I make my decision, I don't really change it. I don't like him. But over time, there are certain wrestlers who have won me over. I must say, I've spoken ad nauseum about Melo and his generic hip hop style. I just didn't like him. I just did not like him. But Melo won me over. And there are a significant amount of wrestlers that have won me over time. As I said, yeah, Melo was one of them. And I think Roman is another one. I didn't like Roman either. I thought he was pushed too heavily. And even when he became the tribal chief, and that was working for probably the first year or so, or maybe even more, actually the entirety of the tribal chief reign, I wanted him to lose the belt. I didn't like him because, again, I'm stubborn. I made my decision. I didn't like him, and I stuck with it. What I'm seeing now with Roman Reigns, especially after we got to know Joseph and his situation, it humanized him a lot more. And I became a lot more empathetic towards the man. And I watch what he does now. I remember John Cena saying to him, "I'm here because you can't do your job." We all remember that promo? Well, he can do it now. He took his time and did what he needed to do to become better. And you understand the growing pains and the hits if you start to click them together into the puzzle of Joseph, Roman Reigns, whatever you want to call him, because he didn't just talk about that. Or that's not the only thing we should remember. We should also remember what he said to CM Punk about CM Punk leaving the company and making things way harder than it needed to be for him. So we have the pressure of being pushed into the sphere. We have the pressure of CM Punk making his life harder than it needed to be by running his mouth. And then we have what John Cena said to him, "I'm here because you're not doing it right." That's a lot of pressure to be on a man that's going through the medical situation that he's going through. So over time, I start to understand Roman well. And if you watch the match yesterday, he's the champion, but his selling for Jacob was so phenomenal. And it made me think back again to CM Punk and the interviews he took when he kept saying, make sure Roman looks big, make sure Roman looks tough, make sure Roman looks strong. 5 steps later, make sure Roman looks strong. We're going to make Roman look strong. I remember all of that. And whereas CM Punk seemed to have needed to keep saying that over and over again, like it's not something that is just happens in the business. What do you think they do with Obafemi? What do you think they do with Royce Keys? He seemed to make a big deal over it. And I watched Roman do that very well last night. There was a moment where I think he hit him with a Superman. He hit Jacob with a Superman punch, and Jacob just popped back up. And the look of sheer shock on Roman's face. Let's remember, they're family. They know what each other can do. They're all Samoan. Samoans know what Samoans can do. Roman wasn't really that surprised, but he played it so well. He sold so easily, and I thought that was absolutely fantastic. His selling for me made Roman Reigns the MVP of the night. The MVP of the night. So my Triple Crown champ winner for MVP of the night, Backlash, Tampa Bay, Florida, is the OTC Roman Reigns. Congratulations, sir. Well, that brings us to the end of the show. And if you have liked the content, please hit like, subscribe, hit the notification button. It lets you know when I'm uploading next. And until then, I have been the Triple Crown champ.